put the time in up front to validate some of the things that you're doing, because it's very easy to start something, get pot committed, and then realise you've got real structural deficiencies within it. I believe in as much as anyone to test and learn and get on with stuff, and I think the worst thing you can do is over procrastinate, wait and try and reach perfection. But if you are going to take the risk, leave your job, put all your efforts into one thing, validate it potentially slightly before you get out there, and check that there is actually a willing buyer and market for your product. So you can waste an awful lot of time with the wrong idea, and equally you can go very, very quickly with the right one.
This is The Summit by Fearless Adventures. I'm Dominic McGregor, and every week my co-founder David Newns and I will be talking to inspirational leaders about their experiences as they strive towards their summit.
Hello and welcome to The Summit. Here we're talking to inspirational business leaders about their business and personal life and everything in between. We're going to hear the highs and the lows of their stories and their ambitions to the future. Today we're here with James Cox, the founder of Simba Sleep, one of the most amazing mattress businesses in the UK, and also the founder of Stonebridge, which is an investment vehicle to look at direct-to-consumer brands. So nice to meet you, James.
Good to see you guys.
So James, talk to us about where it all first started. Was Simba Sleep your first business, or where did that come from?
Initially started my career in finance. I always wanted to go and be a trader in the city, which I, for some reason, had an obsession with as a kid. So I went to university, but I went to 2 lectures and left and went straight into city after Freshers Week, which was very enjoyable.
Got the good part of the way.
Exactly. I thought I'd go and do the important bits and then move on. Did equity trading for a few years and set up a foreign exchange market making business, which was interesting in one regard, but I found it quite same after a while. So watched the emergence of direct-to-consumer businesses and such, and having made a few small investments in them, I thought it'd be good to try and start one and see what business is all about properly. So we started Simba in 2015 and grew it from there.
What was the inspiration behind it? Were you interested in that whole sector, or kind of what were you trying to disrupt?
It just felt like a completely broken experience. If anyone had ever been to a bed store and jumped on the end of a mattress and tried to work out in 15 minutes or 15 seconds whether it was the right thing for them, they'd probably realised a similar thing. I think it was a very opaque market in terms of pricing as well. So you had things that were 200 quid or things that were 10 grand. And once we looked into it, the reality is most of them are very similar. So people were sort of being led down a garden path. And it just felt like there was a great opportunity to launch a brand that was about simplicity and innovation in terms of product. So most people ultimately don't know necessarily what they want or need in a product. So we built a product that was adaptable and could work for the widest portion of the audience, and effectively sold it in a very easy, low friction manner. So if you didn't like it, you could send it back within 100 days, but try it in the comfort of your own home. And we thought that thesis was well worth a try, and went from there. So
essentially what you did is you allowed people to sleep on the decision.
Absolutely.
Totally. and then make the call.
100%. And you're always worried about how many you're going to get back. And the pessimist in you says that people will use and abuse that system. Obviously, some people do, but net, we always had a very low single-digit return percentage, and it was good. People generally can actually begin to like a product, and considering the amount of time they spend in them, we thought it was important.
You look at the kind of path ahead of you, and you know the kind of the way you want to get to, but how do you talk about taking those first couple of steps on the journey? How do you know what to do, and how do you kind of find confidence to kind of go after it?
I think there's a certain element of learning on the job, no doubt. But really, we just had good conviction behind where we were going. In terms of the founders, there were 3 of us. So Steve, who was running the business with me as MD at the time when I was CEO, who's now the CEO, came from a deep operational background and had been running e-commerce businesses for a long time, so had a good understanding of the operational elements that were required. I spent a lot more time on the brand and the product and that type of stuff, and our third co-founder was from the mattress industry, so we had a good understanding of the different areas within, which probably made some of the decisions easier. But daily there were challenges around how you can get cut through, what's the right product, what's the right messaging, marketing channels, etc. And really taking advice from good people around us was valuable, but also certain element of trial and error. I think for every right decision you make a wrong one, you just have to correct it quickly.
And when you're on that kind of looking back at the journey, there's kind of those key pivotal moments where you think that was a massive accelerator. Yeah. What were they for you?
I think there were a couple of bits. I mean, credibility to us was really important from the early days. We always knew for that particular business we'd need to raise some capital to get it going. So in the early days, and at that time, the majority of people were still buying beds in stores. So we managed to persuade John Lewis before we launched to do a partnership with us. So we were in store in all of their nationwide shops. So it was very easy for us to say, trusted by John Lewis, go and try it here, etc. Fortunately, most people didn't, and they bought directly from the website, so it worked out all right. I think that was a key enabler. Additional key enablers of meeting Steve, who we did the business with, invested in his prior company, Tribe Sports, which at the time was an interesting idea, but had struggled to scale despite his capabilities. And so the prior experience of learning and having met him really enabled us to accelerate the strategy. And on the way forward, I think it was a lot of time just then being focused around what we were trying to achieve rather than trying to do lots of things. So there were lots of ideas that came along the way, and I think actually saying no to half of them was probably one of the bigger benefits rather than getting dragged off in many directions.
What was the one, is there one that you can think back to that you said no to that you really wanted to do?
It was normally the territories. I remember going to India and having a trip there and thinking, great, we take over the world and let's launch mattress direct to consumer in India. It probably would have been a great idea, but I think also given our lack of experience in the market, we probably lost a load of money and wasted a load of time. So that was one I personally was very keen on, as well as certain other businesses that we looked at we thought we could integrate. But in hindsight, I think clarity and execution is probably a big benefit.
So a lot of people watching this are entrepreneurs and they're building their own brands today. What does it take to build a new consumer brand in today's world?
I think you've got to have a purpose and a clarity more so than ever. I think the days of launching a product without conviction, I feel pretty over to me. Consumers have got more choice than ever. So I think clarity, conviction, a purpose to exist, and then ultimately a great product. Proliferate. A great product alone, I think, will struggle in this market. I think you need great product, great brand, clear mission, and the capability to execute it. Affordable route to market, in essence.
So Simba, you built this big business. I think it was ups and downs, through that process. Kind of talk us through some of the highs and lows of that whole journey.
Certainly some ups and downs. We got off to a great start with the business. It grew very quickly. We got to £1 million a month in 6 months. It was a fast ascent to where we were going. At that stage, you start to think that you can take over the world. Literally, yeah. And I think there were a number of other competitors in our market that were sort of going very quickly, one of which IPO'd at a point where we were really beginning to accelerate, and the price point that they IPO'd at and the shareholders that they had at the time, I think, set them up for a fall. And we saw their share price go from 100p down to 3 or 4p. That, at the same time, we were heavily investing in international markets and growth, and were reliant on external capital. We saw the negatives of being reliant on third parties, frankly, because we were exposed, we weren't in control of our own destiny in hindsight. And at that point, had to make hard decisions, both in terms of structuring the business and cutting costs, and then also bringing external capital in at levels that you may not have welcomed. But good learning experience came through it, and the business was better afterwards. In terms of high points, there's been a number along the way. I mean, I think really for me personally is watching the brand grow and the brand recognition, especially across the UK, and generally the fact that most people, I'm sure half of them lie, generally like the product. So we no longer give away free ones, because I used to get asked by every single person I know, can I have a mattress? And if I asked you for 900 quid, you'd say no. So don't start saying no.
Damn, cancel, come.
But yeah, I mean, it's definite highs and lows along the way, but great journey.
What do you spend your time doing now? I mean, you've got lots of brands you're involved in. How do you organise your time even,
Trying to get better at it is the answer. Predominantly been focused on investment within singular brands over the last few years, which I've liked and enjoyed, and that's been in direct-to-consumer space, fintech, advertising technology, and different areas. I think one thing realised as time's gone forward, you can't give your attention to everything. So increasingly become more interested in platform-esque plays where you can invest time centrally behind a cohort of brands and get the benefits spread across. So that area interests me the most at the moment, and really a consolidation of just learnings of what we've picked up over the last sort of 5 or 10 years.
What do you think those learnings, the biggest learnings are that you've kind of taken away from the highs and lows of it all?
I think there's an awful lot of duplication across all of these businesses, and people try and learn lessons in silos, which I think if people were more collaborative, open, and shared information more people would avoid the pitfalls that you see from them. We don't need to reinvent the wheel in 99% of the time. So it's more about investing your time into the 5 or 10% that's really going to make the difference to your brand. So information sharing and effectively see beyond the end of your nose or beyond your immediate priorities. I think.
Why doesn't that happen? Because my thesis there would be a lot of the knowledge in some areas is held by third parties, be that agencies or consultants or that. And then secondly, a reluctancy of entrepreneurs to talk to each other on a bit of competition.
Totally. I think the second point is absolutely on point, isn't it? People, not all, but many get quite arrogant about their concept or their creation and think that they know better than everyone else. And I totally get that mentality as well. But on the whole, people aren't going to nick your ideas. If you could learn from someone as a two-way value exchange, you wouldn't want to go and give your best ideas to someone as a one-way street. But the idea of collaboration, groups, sharing ideas, whatever it might be on a reciprocal basis, I think makes perfect sense. The agency thing, I think as well, absolutely on point. People delegate responsibility to agencies on the whole without knowing what they're doing. It then becomes this opaque area where you don't feel you can get out of it.
And I think people do that because when you're running something, as you said before, the team that you put together, you knew mattresses, you knew that industry, but there's a whole host of things you don't know. Absolutely. So you assume that you can lean on these people for support, when really they're not there for support, are they? They're there for their own commercial interests. Totally.
And there are good ones out there, right? Like we've come across the good and the bad of the agency world. There are many who, diminishing return, I think, is something that happens in the vast majority of them. You might get a good first month, second month, but does that last? But relying on them for that understanding of your business, I think is really dangerous. I mean, I like the model where they come in and hire themselves out. I think that's quite useful because you do need expertise, and I think third-party expertise is helpful. But reliance over the long term, I think you're effectively building structural efficiency into your business.
We meet founders, kind of, we've spoken to a lot of founders on this podcast. There's always been this kind of drive, this ambition, this kind of ultimately the want to change something in their life, change their outcomes of their life, or move, female entrepreneurs who wanted to change the way they're treated, for example, and actually have a platform. Do you see that in founders that you're working with? I mean, is that something that, is a common denominator in the companies you invest in and the founders you work with?
I think so. And I think if you have that extra drive, then that's what's going to get you up an hour earlier and ultimately make the hard decisions at the times that you need to and give you the associated drive. So I do, and I think there's a portion that do and generally mean it, and then there's always, most people have got a story, haven't they? So just delineating between the two, I suppose. But that extra drive and a real purpose and a passion, the best people I know have come with a real drive and angle and effectively, axe to grind, in essence, for whatever angle that might be.
It's the balance between selling the story and selling what the story's taught you.
Yeah.
And I think you're right, there's a lot of people who sell the story rather than selling that. There was a story, I learned this from it, and this is now what I'm applying to the world.
Yeah, the greenwash gloss of, high level oversights probably, doesn't get you there, does it? It's the lessons and the learnings are the important bit, in my opinion.
And in terms of direct consumer brands, what's that sector looking like at the moment? Are you seeing more small brands coming on there? What's their journey going to look like? It feels like there's a lot of disruption about to happen in that space.
It does feel like it's changing. A lot of the capability of launching a brand from scratch, I would say, is a lot harder now than it might have been a number of years ago. 5-10 years ago, you could go and deploy money through Facebook, Instagram, or whatever the relevant channel was at the time and be quite confident you weren't going to get a diminishing return. I think that's changed to a certain degree. So, the ability to look at different channel mix is important. Equally, launching a product and a business, I think, has also become infinitely easier. Things like Shopify, all of the ecosystems, plugins. When we were doing our first ones, you had to build and develop half the stuff that you needed to do. Now it's just plug and play. So the competition that's got into the market, I think, has saturated certain sectors to a degree. And by proxy, I don't think that's necessarily sustainable. So bigger may start to play out. But I think there's always space for a challenger as well. If there's genuine innovation and a cut through to how you can get to your customer. I think you've got to work harder to get to the same result these days.
In one respect, it feels like it's getting easier to become an entrepreneur. But equally, it feels at the same time, young people are growing up in families that, they're coming from places where they're already very comfortable. If I think about my own son, I often think about, will he have the ambition I had when he grows up?
Same fear I have.
How do you think about that?
If you look at the cost of living and everything that's taking place in the world, I don't think you can argue being an entrepreneur is an easy path. The sacrifices and the lack of potential income that you might have in the early days, I don't think anyone can say that's the easier route.
It's glorified.
Yeah.
It's very glorified at the moment.
It is.
People want to be it because of...
It's very trendy, isn't it?
Yeah.
Half the content one would go and consume online is, great, look at me, I'm a rock star and my life is perfect. I think we all know the reality is there's two sides to that coin, and for every good, you miss the bad that people live through their lives. But I still think it's a great time to start a business. If you look at the capability and the opportunity that can create for the person and the people around them, I would encourage anyone to try, as long as the idea stacks up and is sound. But nothing ventured, nothing gained is always my opinion.
So if we talk about the kind of motivation for kids and kind of inspiring them, is like, what rules can you set them in terms of this is a way you should be thinking? How do you do it? I'm just asking questions to everyone.
I think you have to put a lot of effort into your kids, and it's hard because you give them what they need because you don't want them to go without something, but then at the same time then you're making them really comfortable. It's a really tough thing to do. I think think about how what we do as a legacy for the next generation and how we set the world up is going to be really interesting. There's lots of issues to talk about, but that's going to be one of them, I think.
Yeah, values set and morals set, but then also desire to get out of bed and get on with it. A very hard balance though. It'd be easy to say the answer. I think we can all only comment in 15, 20 years whether that's been correct or wrong. But
do you think, coming back to the entrepreneurs that I'm seeing now, there's this much more mission-led approach? Feels to be anyway. I don't know how much of it is, like you say, greenwashing and people saying they want to do this. Do you think that again, with future generations, we are able to inspire them not through financial objectives, which may have been 20, 30 years ago, the aim, to now be mission orientated, which then, what you do in terms of the inspiration and kind of the motivation is not tied to tangible returns, but try to have an impact?
I think absolutely with some people. And the strange thing is pursuing the mission-driven approach actually probably precipitates the financial reward for people. Purely pursuing a financial gain in a business without a mission probably leads to failure. So it's inverse in many ways. But I think people do care a lot more, don't they? I mean, I was having lunch with my nephews last weekend. They're 5, 7 and 9, and you ask them what they care about. They genuinely care about the world. They genuinely care about global warming. They genuinely care about the state of other people and how other people live. I think that has become way more profound over the last 5, 10 years, and that generation that are coming through have a care and an awareness. So I think more by proxy probably will follow their true passion and dream versus going into the run-of-the-mill industries that most people went into when a job was a job, right? If you're doing something like that, I don't think you'd view a job as a job. It'd be a lovely place to be.
You spoke before about kind of, entrepreneurs, you often think everything's wonderful, it's all great when you look back at these stories. I often think about the mental health of entrepreneurs. You have to be super resilient. All those no's, all those problems, all those issues, you're on your own. It must have this massive toll on mental health. Whether you end up exiting successfully or it fails, I think everything in between, there's a massive price to pay for it.
Yeah. And I think it's a massive issue that needs more help and support. I'm sure as a group here, we've all had our own problems from setting up businesses and running them, and days where you don't feel like you've got help or support or whatever else. And it's quite hard to go and vent to someone when they think your life's great. Yeah. So, I don't know the answer to it, but, if you go to most of your mates, especially if you're a young entrepreneur and go, oh, my life's shit because I've got because I've got a great business and, but it's really hard, they go, all right, come and sit in my seat, right? So I think you can probably feel limited around who you can speak to. So a support network and help there, I think, is definitely required. And for a lot of people, don't make it through that mental pain and barrier. And by proxy, there's no lack of success. So I think it's better for the economy, better for the world, and generally better for humanity, full stop, if there is additional help and support for people there. I've always taken counsel from people over the years and have seen people that have helped me through times that have been challenging, and hugely grateful for that. But if you don't know those people, you don't have access to them, or you don't have the time to find them, I think that's very hard. So anything that can be invested, I think is brilliant.
And I also think the fact that those people will give you time.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing I love about the entrepreneur community, is that to other entrepreneurs you will always give time. But I think there's a potentially lack of understanding maybe from younger entrepreneurs that the mentorship and the fact that entrepreneurs have been there before, they will commit time. And that's one thing I say to all young entrepreneurs is just reach out and speak to people, because like you said, the journey we've all been through, we've all had ups and downs, and we can share them and help younger entrepreneurs not make the mistakes we made.
Totally.
Be it like, obviously we don't know much about their business, but we can talk about the fundamentals in terms of burnout, overcommitting yourself, struggling with kind of like people problems and issues in business. So it's one of those things where the answers are been done thousands and thousands of times before. Yeah. You just need to speak to those people.
100%. And people are willing. I was always amazed at how willing. I have had lunches and meetings and stuff with people I've outreached to. And I was amazed that they'd even be bothered to respond to me. Yeah. And there's a true willingness and openness there, isn't there? I mean, I'm not sure you could call up 100 people and expect them all to respond, but like if
a good amount. Yeah. More than, like you say, more than you expect.
Totally.
Would be there to.
And totally sympathise with your position in your journey. And whilst it may be a different vertical, the commonality is huge, right?
Exactly.
It's very valuable.
So, we're on the summit here. You've done some amazing things so far. You're involved in loads of stuff. What is the summit for you? What does that look like? Have you been there? Have you passed it? Are you still working towards it?
Certainly don't think I've been there or past it. And, for me, I view this more as a journey. I have no idea where or if there is a true summit. I think summit, from a personal capacity, for me would be balance of doing work, which I love, which I don't think, great, I'm going to work and retire in 10 years. I think I'd, shortly followed by a divorce and a few other things if I did that. That's not really set up for...
Better handicap, though.
Yeah, true. That's true. The summit for me is just getting to a place where you're happy and content. And I know that sounds... Are
you there?
As it does. No, not yet. No, I don't think I am. And I don't know if you ever truly get there. But I would say I'm definitely a lot further along the journey than I was 5 years ago. And you just hope you're further down the journey in 5 years' time. But
just kicking it a little bit further every single time.
Got to, right? And set goals along the way. But every time I set a goal, if you achieve it, then you set another one. So I don't think that's the end, is it? But, not for me personally, anyway. But I'll let you know when we get there.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, let me know what we need to do.
And what would your advice to be for a young entrepreneur today, trying to create a business that's got a mission and a purpose about it?
I think just put the time in up front to validate some of the things that you're doing, because it's very easy to start something, get pot committed, and then realise you've got real structural deficiencies within it. I believe in as much as anyone to test and learn and get on with stuff. And I think the worst thing you can do is over procrastinate, wait and try and reach perfection. But if you are going to take the risk, leave your job, put all your efforts into one thing, validate it potentially slightly before you get out there and check that there is actually a willing buyer and market for your product. So you can waste an awful lot of time with the wrong idea, and equally you can go very, very quickly with the right one.
Thank you for joining us today on the summit. We've really enjoyed hearing about James's story and his journey, and I hope what you've heard today helps you on your next adventure.